Hello guys and welcome back to Summer Studios YouTube channel. In today's video I'm going to be showing you how to create a pretty realistic looking marshmallow material in Maya with Arnold nodes. So in the last episode we did a sort of tutorial on creating this little marshmallow boy that we're going to be using for an animation at a later point. And I said that I would show you how to make the material, so let's get right into it. We're going to go ahead and select the model, hold down right click, go to assign new material, come to Arnold, and then we're going to create an open PBR surface material. And this is what we're going to be plugging all of our other nodes and maps into to create our marshmallow material. So before we go any further, I'm going to go ahead and create a light. You can create any light you like, but for today's purposes, I'm going to create a sky dome light. And I'm just going to plug a high dynamic range image into that I have stored here. Okay. I like to tweak some of the settings of this light, but for today's video, you don't have to do that, but I'm just going to quickly do that for my own sanity. You can set the sky radius to 0 underneath the viewport here to make this disappear if you are using a sky dome light. I don't like to see it in the background. And then we can go ahead and press render and then press Arnold. And then we'll be able to see this lit nicely for us. Okay, and you can see the color here is a different. As we've applied the material to the actual marshmallow body, you can see it's different to the eyes and the mouth. So let's go ahead and open up the Hypershade editor, which is where we're going to be adding and creating all of our nodes for our material. So we're going to click this little blue ball here, and that's going to take us to this menu. And in order to view our material, we're going to click on this new open PBR surface here that we created, and then click on this button, and that will just grab that for us in the middle of the graph editor here. Good practice is to get into the habit of renaming materials as you create them. So I'm going to call this marshmallow material, just so we know what this is when we look at this list up here. And I'm happy with the color already because marshmallows, they do come in different colors, but today we're just going to do a classic kind of off-white one. Another good thing to look at as well when you're creating materials is, just like with your models, you want to look at reference, especially if you're going for realism. So I've got some pictures of some marshmallows here, and you can see the texture is a little unique. It's not something we could create with just a single noise texture. There's various different patterns going on here. We've got this kind of, if you look closely for a while, this sort of wavy pattern here that's going through the marshmallow. And then on top of that, we have this sort of graininess as well. And there's also some subsurface going on here, like the sort of thing that you get with skin, where the light's going beneath the surface and bouncing around a little bit before coming out. So we're going to go ahead and replicate that. And it's a little bit easier to create this than you might think. We're going to use some displacement and some normal maps and some subsurface, and that's going to get us most of the way there. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on my other screen for now. I would recommend having a reference up all the time when you're creating realistic or semi-realistic things like this. And we're going to come back to our Hypershade editor. So to begin with, I am going to add some displacement. So that's going to get plugged into this little blue node here. You can see we have a displacement shader. I'm going to press tab and then type in displacement. And there we're going to take the displacement shader. It's going to come with its own little blue node here. We don't need this because it's going to be plugging into the displacement shader input of our marshmallow material we created earlier. We're going to take this green output, plug that into the displacement shader. And on its own, this isn't going to do anything. Essentially, this is just kind of like a way to read a displacement map and plug it into the material. It's like the middleman between the two, and it's necessary in order for this to work. Then we're going to create a file node, because today I'm going to be using a file texture that I have, and I'll show you a good place to get free versions of those. You can go to sites like Polyhaven, which has a bunch of different free materials. You can go to Ambient CG, which also has a bunch of free materials for you to download. I think you can donate if you want to, but other than that, they're all free, and that's where I get most of my materials for these videos. So I'm going to take the out color red from here. You can also take the alpha, and that's because the displacement doesn't need a full RGB image. It needs just values between 0 and 1, right? Like black and white kind of values. And you can also just take a single color too, and that will work just as well. And I'm going to set the color space from sRGB to go to utility and then go to raw. And then turn on alpha is luminance as well. And you can also tick this as here as well, because changing the color space to raw, sometimes Maya will throw up an error. If you tick this box, you won't get any errors. But you don't have to tick that box, but at least change this to raw and then set alpha is luminance for this, okay? And I have a material that I've downloaded, and funnily enough, this material here is actually a bark material. If I go ahead and open up just the AO map here, you can see this is tree bark, and you might be thinking, why am I doing this? Well, because it has this kind of wavy texture that I'm looking for, and I'm sure if we spent some time recreating this with noise, we could do it. But sometimes when you're working in 3D, you can kind of think outside the box. You don't always necessarily need to use the thing that makes the absolute most sense. Sometimes you can get a realistic result or a good result using things that you wouldn't normally expect, like this bark material for the marshmallow, okay? Which, hear me out, makes zero sense, but I'll show you why it works in a minute. So I'm going to copy the file path here because we're going to need to plug that into the image name. I'm going to click on this little file icon, then just paste our file path in the search box. And I'm going to take the displacement map, okay? This is going to give us some extra detail on the surface of the marshmallow. We don't have to do this step, but I want this to be quite good when you're looking at it close up, and I don't want to have to model in these details. That's why we're using a displacement map. Displacement will displace the geometry without us having to model it, and you'll see how that works in just a sec. One thing to do once you've applied a displacement map as well is if you come to the attribute editor with your model selected, go to Arnold, go to subdivisions and turn on type from none to cat Clark and change the iterations up to something like 3 or 4, nothing too crazy. Reason being is while displacement does displace the geometry, it will add extra model detail for us in the render. And you'll see how that works once I click render in a second. You do need the topology density to support it, right? This, while it's even and nice quads, is not going to be enough. So that's why I'm turning on this, which is adding more polygons at render time rather than us having to smooth it in the viewport and slow down the computer. So if I go ahead and render this now, you can see our marshmallow looks like a horrible mess. And the reason for that is because, one, we need to just tweak the displacement map, and two, this marshmallow boy does not have any UVs, and I'm not actually planning on using any for this material. We're going to do this procedurally, so we don't need UVs. So in order to do that, we're going to come back to the Hypershade editor, unplug our file texture, and we're going to create a AI triplanar. Just to be clear as well, this is not artificial intelligence, right? AI. It's AI basically stands for Arnold. I don't know why they went with AI as the prefix for this, but that's just what it is. So no artificial intelligence. This is not ChatGPT. I can then take the out color from this and the out color red from the triplanar and plug that back into the displacement. Okay, and I also like to set the blend all the way to 1, just because that will help smooth out some of the edges. And what this is going to do is, instead of using UVs, it's going to project our material from 3 different angles, right? 3 planes. So front, side, and top, and bottom normally, right? Those 3 axes, X, Y, and Z, evenly onto our model, which means that we don't need UVs. You do have less control, but it does give you the freedom to just not use UVs if you need a quick material. So we're going to have to go ahead and tweak this displacement because obviously this is way too much, right? If we look at our reference, this waviness is quite subtle. So we're going to come back and we're going to change a few things here. I like to turn off auto bump because we're going to be getting bump mapping or normal mapping from our actual normal map. And this auto bump here tends to look a bit crap. I wouldn't use it in general. I'm also going to turn down the scale of this down to something like maybe 0.1. Sometimes that'll mess up the render. You can see here it's failing to continue the viewport render, so you can just restart it. And you can see now this is looking a lot more subtle. The amount of waves is a bit too much for my liking, so we can change this by tweaking the triplanar map. Okay, if you click on that, you can see there's 3 inputs here for the scale, right? Those 3 planes. I'm going to reduce this maybe to something like 0.6 in each one. Okay, you can see that's messed up the render again here, so we'll just restart that by clicking viewport again and then clicking Arnold again. So now that's made those wavy bits a bit smaller. I might make those even smaller. We'll reduce this to 0.4 and we'll just restart the render again. Okay, that's looking a bit more like what I want. But it might still be a little bit too strong. So we're going to come back to the displacement map again and reduce the scale maybe to something like 0.06. Okay, you might have to get used to restarting the render here. Sometimes it doesn't, and it does it pretty well. You don't have to restart, but sometimes you have to restart pretty frequently. If you're not getting enough detail from your displacement map as you would like, you can come and increase the iterations of your subdivision to 4, maybe. Right, so now you can see I'm getting a lot more detail from those curves, those waves. And it's looking a lot more textured, but it doesn't really look like bark, does it? It's white, and the displacement is quite minimal. It's giving us the kind of effect that I'm looking for, that waviness in the marshmallow. Right, but we're not quite there. Right now it's looking a bit like a rock, some kind of plaster rock type thing. So we need to have another material to offset that and do a few more things. So we're going to come back to the Hypershell editor and create an AI normal map. And we're going to take the out value and plug that into the normal camera. Okay. I'm going to create another AI triplanar because, again, we're not using UVs. We're going to take the out color red, or sorry, just the out color, and plug that into the input. And I'm going to create another file node. This time, change the color space to raw again, but leave alpha as luminance turned off. We don't need to change that for a normal map. It's not necessary. So another material that I am going to use in this case, again, on the topic of using materials which aren't necessarily for this, is I have a foam material, right? A packing foam, the kind of thing you might find in like a higher end, like maybe box of, I don't know, headphones or something. The sort of foam that's packed in. Because I want this kind of like fine dusty texture, and we could use just a noise texture within Arnold to do this, but then we'd have to use a bump map, and I'd rather use a normal map because I think the results are a bit better. So just any kind of texture really that has a fine noisiness to it, like this foam, will do. So I'm going to plug the out color of that into the input of the triplanar. Okay, and then we come back to our render and see what that looks like. Okay, that looks like that's not working quite right. That's because I need to change the utility to raw. I forgot to do that. Okay, and there we go. Now we're getting our normal map. It's quite hard to see right now. Okay, we need to leave the render to go for a little bit, and you can see the noise kind of is there, but it's very, very faint. And I think that's probably because our triplanar is a bit too big. By default, it's 1. This will vary depending on the size of your model. So I might decrease this down to like 0.6 so it's more visible. Right, the normal map's more visible. Okay, and you can see now that the noise is a lot more visible on the model. Okay, I think the waviness that we're getting from the displacement might still be a little bit too high, so I'm going to reduce this again, maybe down to 0.4, and just restart the render. Okay, so I think this is going in the right direction, but there's still some things I'd like to tweak. I think the noise might still be a little bit too big, so I'm going to reduce the size on the triplanar again, maybe down to something like 0.3, and then we'll see what that looks like. Okay, now the noise is a lot more visible. There we go. So it's kind of getting that bit more like powdery look that I was looking for. And I might increase the normal map strength from 1 to 1.2. I wouldn't recommend going too far past 1. I would only ever reduce it, really. But I think as long as it's not too much, in this case it's okay. And we're going to need to bump this up anyway when we add some of the subsurface because it will minimize some of this dustiness. Okay, nice. And one of the last things to do is just increase the roughness, because marshmallows are quite rough materials. They're not very shiny. So we'll up the roughness maybe to something like 0.7. Okay. And we're nearly there, but I think the last thing we can do maybe is add some subsurface. So by default, that's at 0. I'm just going to go ahead and increase this to 0.2. Okay. And you can see straight away what that's doing is it's making the material look a little bit more porous, like some of the light is coming through from the environment that we have here. And it makes it look a little bit better. You might notice when you do this that the render times kind of increase drastically, and that is one of the downsides of using subsurface. I would only use this if you absolutely need it for like more up-close renders or realistic renders of like skin and any other porous materials like marshmallow in this case. But you can see it's adding a little bit more realism to this. Looks a bit more like a marshmallow. And we're getting that kind of wavy detail from the bark, and this is a good example of why, what I was saying earlier, you can kind of use different materials for different things that you wouldn't normally expect, and you can kind of think outside the box of 3D sometimes, and you don't necessarily have to follow, you know, the rules 100%, right? This is 3D, this is CG in a computer. You can kind of like bend things to work the way you want them to. Like we used a wood texture here to create this for the marshmallow, but it works because of how we've used it and how we've adjusted it. So that's how you create a very quick, semi-realistic, I would say, looking marshmallow material in Maya, just from a few different nodes and maps. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. In the next one, I'm going to be showing you how we can rig this guy. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions at all, please do let me know. I'm going to make more materials on the Hypershade, since that seems like something you guys want to see. And yeah, thanks for watching. Also, this will be the last long form until probably the new year. This will be the last longer video that we do till the new year. So thanks so much for watching over the year and subscribing and commenting and all of your like questions and feedback and suggestions. They've been super, super helpful, and the channel's grown so much over the year. So thanks for sticking with us, and have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.